This is the story of Palo Alto, California. It was an area that was pretty unpopulated until jobs came to the area in World War II. And when it came, of course, along with the jobs came workers, people and their families. And among those were both white families and African-American families. So what I'm about to read is a passage from this book. Over the next few years, the number of African Americans seeking jobs and homes in and near Palo Alto grew, but no developer who depended on federal government loan insurance would sell to them, and no California state licensed real estate agent would show them houses. But then, in 1954, one resident of a whites-only area in East Palo Alto, across the highway from the Stanford campus, sold his house to a Black family. Almost immediately, Floyd Lowe, president of the California Real Estate Association, set up an office in East Palo Alto to panic white families into listing their homes for sale, a practice known as blockbusting. He and other agents warned that, quote, a Negro invasion, end quote, was imminent and that it would result in collapsing property values. Soon, growing numbers of white owners succumbed to the scaremongering and sold at discounted prices to the agents and their speculators. The agents, included Lowe himself, then designed display ads with banner headlines, quote, colored buyers, exclamation point, end quote, which they ran in San Francisco newspapers. African Americans, desperate for housing, purchased the homes at inflated prices. Within a 3-month period, one agent alone sold 60 provisionally white-owned properties to African Americans. The California Real Estate Commission refused to take any action, asserting that while regulations prohibited licensed agents from engaging in, quote, unethical practices, the exploitation of racial fear was not within the Real Estate Commission's jurisdiction. Although the local real estate board would ordinarily blackball any agent who sold to a non-white buyer in the city's white neighborhoods, thereby denying the agent access to the multiple listing service upon which his or her business depended. Once wholesale blockbusting began, the board was unconcerned, even supportive. At the time, the Federal Housing Administration and Veterans Administration not only refused to insure mortgages for African Americans in designated white neighborhoods like Ladera, they also would not insure mortgages for whites in a neighborhood where African Americans were present. So once East Palo Alto was integrated, whites wanting to move into the area could no longer obtain government-insured mortgages. State-regulated insurance companies like the Equitable Life Insurance Company and Prudential Life Insurance Company also declared that their policy was to not issue mortgages to whites in integrated neighborhoods. State insurance regulators had no objection to this stance. The Bank of America and other leading California banks had similar policies, also with the consent of federal banking regulators. Within 6 years, the population of East Palo Alto was 82% Black. Conditions deteriorated as African Americans who had been excluded from other neighborhoods doubled up in single-family homes. Their East Palo Alto houses had been priced so much higher than similar properties for whites that the owners had difficulty making payments without additional rental income. Federal and state housing policy had created a slum in East Palo Alto. With the increased density of the area, the school district could no longer accommodate all East Palo Alto students, so in 1958, it proposed to create a second high school to accommodate the expanding student population. The district decided to construct a new school in the heart of what had become the East Palo Alto ghetto, so Black students in the existing integrated building would have to withdraw, creating a segregated African American school in the eastern section and a white one to the west. The board ignored pleas of African American and liberal white activists that it draw an east-west school boundary to establish 2 integrated secondary schools. In ways like these, federal, state, and local governments purposely created segregation in every metropolitan area of the nation. If it could happen in liberal San Francisco, then indeed it not only could but did happen everywhere else. That the San Francisco region was segregated by government policy is particularly striking because, in contrast to metropolitan areas like Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, or Baltimore, Northern California had few African Americans before migrants like Frank Stevenson arrived during World War II in search of jobs. The government was not following pre-existing racial patterns, it was imposing segregation where it hadn't previously taken root. So this book, I highly recommend it. It'll break your heart, every sentence of it, not just the kind of structural racism and redlining that happened when the FHA refused to back mortgages, and without an FHA backing, mortgages as most of us know them just don't exist. But refused to back mortgages for African Americans. They refused to back mortgages for whites who moved into African American neighborhoods. They worked at both local and state and federal level, worked actively to disintegrate neighborhoods in these other cities, older cities that were already integrated. And this was primarily between 1910 and 1970. But it went on long after 1970, and it started long before 1910. So let's talk about density and housing development. So our question was this. We said an architect is developing a 95-acre site with a goal for the entire site of 22 units per acre. He's developed 60 acres of the site so far at 15 units per acre. What should the density be in units per acre for the remaining not yet developed portion? All right, and those of you guys who are taking the Amber book will recognize questions like this. I think it's worth going over them again because it just takes a second. It's not super complicated algebra, but it just takes a second to remind yourself what you need to know. What you need to know basically, and I'm going to repeat this over and over again. What you need to know is that what you want to do to find the composite is to take each component value and multiply it by its percentage of the whole. All right, let's start. So we have a 95-acre site with a goal for the entire site of 22 units per acre. Now, I didn't specify what the units were. They're typically in this scenario going to be housing, but certainly it could be something else. It could be a medical office park or something like that. And this particular architect or the developer has developed 60 acres of the 95. So there's 95 total. And he's developed 60 of the 95 at 22 per acre. So this is 22 per acre. I'm sorry, the goal of the entire site is 22 per acre. The 60 was developed at 15 units per acre. So right away, what should tell you is, for your first question should be, is this going to be higher or lower than 15? We've developed 60 acres so far at 15 per acre. We have to figure out for the remaining not yet developed portion, what's that density going to be? And of course, it's going to be higher because our goal is 22. So our goal is 22. So far, we've been behind that goal at 15. So we need to develop the rest of it at something higher than 15, and indeed something higher than 22, so that the area weighted average works out to be 22. Now, the way we're going to do that, as I mentioned, is we're going to take the value times the percentage at that value plus the next value times the percentage at that value, and that's going to equal the total goal. So what does that mean? That means we have a value so far of 15 units per acre, and we're going to multiply that by the 60 acres we've developed so far, divided by the 95 acres of the total parcel. And we're going to add that to some other value that we're trying to figure out. What is the value in units per acre of our remaining portion of the site? And we're going to multiply that by the remaining, which is going to be 35, because there's 35 acres that we haven't developed yet. I've just got that by subtracting 60 from 95. 35 acres remaining divided by 95 acres. So the proportion that is X. So it's the value of what we've done so far times the proportion of what we've done so far, plus the value of what we haven't done yet times the proportion of what we haven't done yet. And that's equal to our goal of 22 units per acre. Now then it becomes a fairly straightforward algebra exercise. We can go ahead and for this one work it out. So we have 22 let's bring this over here. We have 22 units per acre, and we're going to subtract from both sides 15 units per acre times 60 over 95. And that's equal to 35 over 95x. And to get x alone, we're going to divide both sides by 35 over 95. So we have x equals 22 minus 15 times 60 over 95 divided by 35 over 95. And when we run that all out, we get to reach our goal of 22, we get an x of 34. Now, as always, never just take that as 34. That 34 has a real meaning, and it's a value. It's a value of how many units per acre we need to develop this kind of hatched area in order to get an overall 22. And does it pass the smell test? Sure, it does. If we've kind of fallen behind and we've only done 15 units per acre for the first 2/3-ish of the site, it would make sense that we have to make up by going well over 22 acres for the rest of it. So 34 units per acre is our goal for the remaining portion. All right, now what we're going to do is, there we go. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to do this one. So go ahead and take 4 minutes to figure this one. Let's give you 5. Go ahead and take 5 minutes to figure this one out on your own and actually do it. All right, now let's take a look. So again, we're taking the value times the proportion plus the value times the proportion equals the goal. So the value that we started with is 23, that's in units per acre, times the proportion, well, it's 75 over 105, plus x times the remaining proportion, which is 40 over 105, equals our goal of 16. Now we know this time that it's going to be less. It's going to be less because we started off above our goal of 16 with 23 units per acre. And for the remaining portion, we need to be sure that we are under that. Let's see how much less. Well, when you run those numbers out, you wind up with a value of negative 1.5 units per acre. How can that be? Well, it'd be because we went over. We developed at too high a density for the first portion. And even if we make the remainder a park, we have exceeded our goal. Now our goal may be based on a maximum allowed by the zoning, in which case we're in big trouble. Or it may be, well, this is the kind of thing you wouldn't do. I mean, you would know, the developer would know, you would know as you went along, but you get the idea that you can make one area so dense that even if you don't develop the other area, you're still too dense for the total. All right, now our next one, have a little, there we go. An architect is designing because these area weighted things, they come in handy in all kinds of areas for these exams and for your profession. An architect is designing a 95 square foot wall with a goal for the entire wall of R22. There's currently 60 square feet of the wall designed so far at R15. What should the R value be for the remaining not yet designed portion? All right, well, those of you who are more astute will have picked up that that's exactly the same question that we started with, except for we started with the question in the parlance or the kind of framework of development density, and now we're just talking about it as a wall. So let's say that the energy code requires at least an R22 for the wall, and we want to see how much windows we could have. You know, what proportion of the wall is windows, given that we have R15 for the opaque portion of the wall. So in this case, it's just like we saw for the first one. We have our value of 15, R15, and we're going to multiply that by the proportion, which is 60 over 95. And we're going to add that to the term we're looking for, x, times the remaining 35 over 95. And we're going to get our target of R22. And when we run that out, we're going to get, just like we did before, we're going to get an x equal to 34. Now, before our x was equal to R34, I'm sorry, before our x was equal to 34 units per acre. Now our x is equal to 34. So we have a wall. The wall is 95 square feet. Our goal for the wall is an R22. We have designed 60 square feet of the wall at 15, at R15. And the question is, what should the remainder of the wall be, the hatched area? What should the remainder of the wall be, given that the goal is R22? And the answer is the remainder of the wall should be R34. So we know we have to have at least an R34 for the remainder of the wall or the remainder of the building envelope or whatever it may be. And of course, if there are more than two different things, which I don't think frankly would happen in the exam because it's timed, but in real life, of course, you'll have the R value of the roof and the R value of the wall and the R value of the window and so forth. So you could figure out, if you know the square foot of the window, you have a sense of what the square foot of the wall can be, then you can figure out, if you have an energy requirement, that you have an overall area weighted R value of whatever, say 15 or 18 or whatever, just to pick a different number than we had before. It's pretty straightforward. You can just take the proportion that is the opaque wall times the R value of the opaque wall plus the R value of the windows times the proportion that is the windows plus the R value of the roof, which is in our case what you're trying to find, times the proportion of the proportion of the roof as a proportion of the overall envelope. All right, let's do another one. All right, and as you see, or you should see by now, that it's just the same problem again. In this case, we're trying to find the area weighted absorption coefficient so that we can come up with a target absorption coefficient so that our reverberation time can be accurate for our given wall. So in this case, same thing, 95 square foot wall, except for we have an absorption coefficient of 0.22 as our goal. And so far we have designed it with a surface that we really want, and 60 square feet at alpha of 0.15. And it's the exact same thing. We'll do 0.15 times the proportion, that is 0.15, plus our remainder times the proportion, that is our remainder, is equal to our target. And again, not surprisingly, we're going to get the same answer since we punched in the same numbers, only instead of 34, it'll be 0.34. But what does that mean? That means our absorption coefficient means we need a fuzzier, more sound absorbent, more velvet-like material in the remainder, in the hatched area, than we had in the area that we've already designed. And this kind of thing works for all kinds of purposes. I mean, it works not just in architecture. If you're trying to figure out what proportion of your 401k should be in stock versus, bonds, if you're within a target. For me, as my grades are due. I'm a professor, as most of you know, here at Virginia Tech. My grades are due tomorrow. If I'm trying to figure out what a final grade is, I'll just take the grade, say someone got a 92%, and if that's worth 15% of their, if that test was worth 15% of their grade, Then I multiply that by 15 over 100, plus maybe they got 100% on a homework assignment that's worth 5% of their grade, and so forth, on and on and on, for all the different assignments and exams and quizzes and projects that I give for a semester. And the proportion should add up to 100%, the proportions of these guys. And then it'll give me an area, not an area, it'll give me a weighted average, their appropriate grade average. All right. Now, it doesn't work for everything. Now, before I go on to talk about that, many of you guys pointed out that this was wrong, and you're right, this is wrong. So this should have been 30. I had a typo in my notes that the answer I gave was right, oops, yeah, and this should have been 35. So I have a couple of typos in my notes, but the answers are all correct. I just wrote it wrong. All right. Now, there are some areas of architecture where you can't just simply area weight. And those have to do with things like within acoustics, decibels, or sound transmission class, or STC. So if we had an STC of one value, or a transmission loss of one value, and we wanted to find out the transmission loss of the other value, we can't simply area weight them. And the reason's actually pretty complicated, but it has to do with the way we measure decibels. And we measure decibels on a logarithmic scale, so it doesn't quite work out the way that sound absorption or units per acre in development or R value does. Likewise, to a lesser extent with light, certainly with decibels. So if you have multiple sources, say you have one trumpet playing and then 3 more play, you can't just say that the composite sound level for 4 trumpets works in the same way that if you just kind of assume that one contributes 1/4 of the sound and the other 3 contribute 3/4, although they kind of do in terms of sound energy. But decibel, again, is a funny way to measure sound energy. And that's why if you're at a stadium with 10,000 people, it doesn't sound 10,000 times louder than it would if there was one person screaming. It sounds much louder, but not 10,000 times louder. Anyhow, all right. So that's how we do area weighting. If you can subtract correctly, which I finally was able to do with a little help from you guys. That's how you do area weighting for unit and densities per acre. And that's how you do it for other things as well. Now, looking at next week's assignment, we're going to talk about forms related to the CE exam. And I'm going to ask you, what do each of the following do? So if you want to get on our mailing list, so these become hot links for you when they get mailed to you next week or next time we meet, then go ahead. If you're not already on our mailing list, go ahead and email firms@amber-book.com. That's firms@amber-book.com. And get on our mailing list. Now, because of the holidays coming up, we won't be meeting until January. The next 2 weeks are Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and I just don't think we'll have enough people to justify. So we'll be getting together in early January of next year to go over these. But anyhow, tell yourself what these forms do, explore the forms, become familiar with them, link your knowledge of the forms to the actual name of the form. It's very easy to forget these. We'll also go over AIA's nomenclature for these forms. These numbers seem random, but they're actually not. There's a pattern to them that if you don't already know about it, I'll let you in on. All right. From last week, I had a question email. Hi, Michael, I just watched your video and had a question about fire partition. I thought that a fire partition needs to extend all the way up to a roof ceiling deck, or it can terminate on the ceiling if the ceiling is rated, while a fire barrier must be continuous to the roof or ceiling deck. I didn't realize the fire partition could terminate just above a drop ceiling as he showed. Am I going crazy? I feel like I read this a while ago, but now I can't find it in the code. Can you please direct me where the code I can find this? Well, she's right. I didn't make that clear. Basically, if the partition, if this is a structural deck, and this is a structural deck, and this is a drop ceiling, if the partition is going to be a fire partition and it's allowed to terminate just above the drop ceiling, then the drop ceiling itself needs to be fire rated as well. I should have mentioned that. And then someone else asked me how important calculations are on these exams, because you would think, given the amount of time we've spent on calculations in the 40 minutes of competence series, you would think that calculations would be like, I don't know, 2/3 of the exams. And those of you guys who have taken the exams know that calculations are actually a relatively small proportion of the exams. Questions with open-ended calculations like the one we just did. If you add up those calculations and you add up the exam questions that have straight up calculations like that, it's pretty small. If you then pile on top of it the exam questions that have calculations where the answer is available in multiple choice, and you add on top of that the exam questions that have questions like that have answers like the result is higher than what had been before, the result is the same as what had been before, those kind of questions where they're still expecting you to understand the quantitative relationship. And then you add on top of that the others that are just kind of quantitative in nature in their thought process, even if there's no specific calculation, like if they're asking for a shear diagram or something like that. If you add those all together, it winds up amounting to a reasonable proportion of the questions that you're going to be asked. Maybe something on the order of 20 to 30% of the questions are going to be either calculations or quantitative thinking. And then probably another 10 to 20%, maybe even an additional 30% are going to be kind of quantitative adjacent. They're going to be the kind of questions where if you understand the calculations, even if you don't have to understand the calculations to answer the question, if you understand the calculations, you can certainly answer the question. So that's why there's probably a few more calculation questions in 40 minutes of competence than there is in the actual exam. My goal for the exam is not to have you see something that is familiar. My goal for the exam is to have you see something that's easy. So we want to train a little bit more difficult, not a lot, but a little bit more difficult than the exam questions, so that when we get to the exam, we see something that isn't so much familiar as is easy. We want something to be easy. I think there's a little too much premium placed on things that look or sound or feel just like the exam, in the same way you wouldn't want to train for a swimming race by swimming the, if you were training to do a mile swim, you wouldn't be training at a mile, you'd be training at 2 miles or a mile and a half, so that when the race came, it would be shorter than what you've trained at. That's the idea.
Hi, Michael. I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
And this is more of a general question, really advice. I'm getting ready to take my exams in the second week of January, and I'm having a hard time trying to, I've heard from a lot of advice, not just from you, but from other people that do this about, if you have a hard question or like a very long question, how do you really know when to skip it or when to not? Sometimes within the exam, you kind of like, you really don't know, you get freaked out and you don't know if you should spend the time to figure out the answer or not. So do you have any quick tips as to what to look for in the question if you just should skip it or not?
Not surprisingly, I do.
Okay.
I do. So there's a bunch of things that you asked a really good question. There's a bunch of kind of there's a bunch of kind of issues embedded in that one question. So the first question is, how fast should you go? Now, historically, before now, the exam was set up so you had, all the exams were set up so you had, I don't know if they were set up intentionally this way, but it seems to work out this way. You have 2 minutes per question for everything that's not case study and 4 minutes per question for everything that is. So that is the pace you wanted to go at the, but before, you generally, many people did not have a lot of extra time. The promise of the new format of the exam, besides the whiteboard that everyone's upset about, is that you're going to have far fewer questions. I think like 15 fewer questions on some of these. So you actually have significantly more than 2 minutes per non-case study, and significantly more than 2 minutes per case study. Now, I would say still your target should still be 2 minutes per question for non-case study and 4 minutes per question for case study. And then that gives you some time afterward to go back through and look at the flagged question. Now, as many of you know, but not enough of you, just in kind of looking at the ARE Facebook page, not enough of you know this, if you take a break during the exam, then you can't look at questions anymore. You're done looking at questions. So, I'm sorry, any question you started, you can't look at again after the break. So it's very important for all of you to, any question you've opened, do not, you can skip it, like you were saying, but do not skip it and then assume you're going to go back to it at the end. You need to go back to it before you take any kind of break. Now, my recommendation is to not take a break. These exams are 3 or 4 hours. College students do final exams this time of year, and they generally take 3 or 4 hours without a break, and it's doable. It's exhausting, but it's doable in most cases. Now, of course, some of you guys have to go, get an insulin shot or feed a baby or whatever. So there's all kinds of reasons that you might need to take a break. But if you can, just plan on not taking a break. And the reason is because those of you who have taken these tests before know that there is a surprising number of cases where you don't know the question, you don't know the answer to a test item, and then later, either in the case studies or often in another question, you find the answer to the one thing that you didn't know before. So my advice is, if you feel stuck on a problem, by all means, just flag it and move on, man. But with the caveat that you need to allow time to go back over that stuff before you take your break. Don't take your break thinking you'll do the flagged questions afterward. So the answer is, if you think the question is going on too long, then it is going on too long. Just take the break. Now, if you think it's going along too long, but you're making good progress and you're 3/4 of the way there, well, obviously, then it's kind of a game time decision. If it's going to take you forever to start again in an hour or two, when you look at it again, because you have to remember how many units per acre was the target and how many, and you don't have your kind of mental bearings or your short-term memory. It's out of your short-term memory. And you're making good progress, it's okay to take 3 or 4 minutes on any given question. Just know that it should average 2 minutes per question for a non-case study question, and average no more than 4 minutes per question for a case study question.
That's a great advice. Thank you very much, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hi, Michael.
Yes. What's up, Nishi?
Hey, so I have done pro practice. I've passed them already, and then I'm having issues with the PA exam, and it was 2009 I passed the pro practice ones. So how much do you think I need to go back and study? Like, I was not planning to touch AHPP at all. I'm not sure how much I should devote my time.
Yeah, I mean, so how long? So you're saying you've taken the pro practice exams, you've taken project management and practice management, and now you're taking
CE, yeah,
and CE, and now you're starting with the other 3. And how long ago was it that you took those first 3?
Last year, 2019.
Now, yeah, I mean, this is why in the exam in the Amber book I jump up and down. And I talk about thinking about these as all one big thing, because even PPD and PDD, which you think of as being all technical, even those are about 1/6, something on the order of 15%. 1 out of 6 questions is going to be under the pro practice umbrella. So if you still know and for the rest of you who are listening, take all the exams at once. I know that's scary. I know you don't believe me, but I'm telling you, it will be, on average, in my experience, it will be 1/2 as many hours studying total and 1/4 as many months to licensure. That said, I'm not going to beat you up for taking the year off because it was a weird year. But that said, it depends what your tolerance for risk is. So, and I know that's not the answer you wanted. You wanted a hard answer, but if you're going to be okay failing it, then just take it. It couldn't hurt. AHPP is Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice, is a huge book. It's over 1,000 pages. And so to reread 1,000 pages because 1 out of 6 questions is on pro practice, knowing that you still remember some of it from a year ago, so you're not going to get all every one of those pro practice questions you're not going to get wrong. Some you'll guess correctly, and some you knew before from school or from work, and some you remember from a year ago. So if I were you, I would absolutely not look at AHPP and take the exams and see what happens, because in the time it takes you to read AHPP, you could have taken the exam twice. So by that I mean, plan on taking the exam. If you fail it, reschedule it for 60 days later, the minute you find out you fail it, and read AHPP then, if you feel like my advice is true, that if it was 1 out of 6 questions on PA, PPD, and PDD were kind of under the pro practice basket or umbrella, then I would definitely think that you should learn that. Now, of course, the AMBER book in pro practice has 4 hours of video for all of pro practice. It'll take you maybe 8 hours to go through, and then there are for each of those three exams, there are something like 100 flashcards. Those will take you for each exam. That'll be another. So it's 8 hours total for the pro practice content, and another maybe 4 hours for each of the decks of flashcards-ish. So you do the math and you start to realize that unless you're paid like 50 cents an hour, it's going to work out better for you if you take AMBER book. But that said, if you want to read all of Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice, it's kind of an interesting book. It repeats itself a little, but it's kind of an interest. The first chapters of each section are pretty interesting. And you can go that route as well during those 2 months if you happen to fail. But the chances are you're going to pass 1 of the 3 or 2 of the 3 or maybe even all 3 of the 3, and then and in that case you won't need to read the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice for the retakes.
I hope so.
Yeah. This is why developers are rich and architects aren't. Because the architects, I can hear in your voice, you're a perfectionist like most of us, and you're thinking, well, I can't have a fail. I've never failed anything in my life, and so you wind up, but actually it is a fail in a way. Overstudying is in a way a fail for many of you, unless you love studying, which some of us do, but unless you love studying, overstudying is a fail. So if you read the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice and pass, it does not mean that you made the right decision. People think it means they made the right decision, but no, it's called survivorship bias. You're looking after the fact and you have no idea. So it might have been that you didn't need to read that book and you still would pass. So not knowing your specific situation, let's say you have a 60% chance of passing PA if you don't read the AHPP, and you have an 80% chance of passing PA if you do. And so that's the way you want to think about it and think, okay, is it worth reading 1,000 pages for a 20% more likelihood of passing? For most people, the answer is no, when they think of it that way. But for some people, the answer is, yeah, I want to read it anyway. And I don't mind, I enjoy reading it. And I don't mind if it takes me longer to get licensed. There's some people who think like that. But for most people, you should just go for it and feel confident in the way a developer feels confident. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. The developer is not trying to make money on every decision. A developer is trying to make money overall, knowing that fretting over decisions or over preparing for things or over designing things or over building things costs more money. So their goal is to make more money in general, knowing that some of their decisions are going to be money losers. That's how you need to think.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question and I believe it's been repeated over and over again. So what does AMBER book suggest the order in which we should start taking our exam if we're taking it all at once?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. Take it all in a week, so it really doesn't matter. But you can do it any order you want. I guess may as well start with whatever one you feel most comfortable with. Now, most people feel most comfortable with one of the pro practice ones because there's less content to learn. But actually, if you look at the pass rates, I don't think they're any higher for the pro practice exams than they are for the other ones. In fact, I think the lowest, I think right now, as of this date, I think practice management has by far the lowest pass rate. So So I would say you can just do it in order front to back. I would, you know what I would do? There, Preeti, who was talking? Was it Preeti?
Yes.
Yeah, there is some loved one in your life that you've been ignoring while you're studying for these exams, and make that person feel important and say, these are the exams. Just make them feel important and act like it's a really important decision, because it's not. And be like, these are the exam divisions I need to take. I need your help, child, spouse, parent, cousin, best friend. I need your help identifying. That's going to be my new advice. I need your help identifying which one I should go first, because you know me so well and you've known me so long. Which one do you think I should do, in what order? And just have them choose it. They'll feel so proud that while they were ignored, they got some say in what you're doing. And it really, truly doesn't matter. I have advice for everything. Everything. You could ask me what you should have for dinner, and I have advice for that. I have no advice for which one you should take first, because I truly, from the depths of my soul, see this as one long exam that really, with so much overlap, with the exception of practice management, so much overlap that it almost doesn't matter, to me which one you take first.
And I agree with you with the practice management. I attempted that one in the 4.0 version, and even though it seemed easy, but it's the most difficult exam to pass. I think so.
Good.
Hi, Michael.
Yes.
I have a question. So I am a planner at work, medical planner. So I do very well with the front end part of the project.
Right.
And I don't deal with construction documents at all. The only resource I have is Ember books. I've just finished the whole construction and the systems. And English being my second language and not being from this country and not learning building construction in undergrad, what resources do I need to study to make sure that I do follow all the construction details and also terminology?
So again, your goal isn't to know them all. Your goal is to know enough to pass.
Mm-hmm.
So, the old joke is, what do they call the guy who graduated last in his medical school class? And the answer is doctor. So the goal is to get the exam right. My advice to anybody who doesn't enjoy the process of studying, doesn't want to study longer. If you love studying, then I'm going to give you different advice. But my advice to anybody who's doing the Amber book is, if you follow the stuff on the Amber book, you'll do fine, probably. And by fine, I mean, you'll pass PPD or PDD, on one of the first 2 tries. That to me is fine. For all the reasons I just talked about. So go in okay with a non-pass. Let's not even call it a fail. Go in okay with a non-pass. And I don't recommend you look at anything else. But if you're going to look at other sources, these are the sources I recommend in order. The Architect Studio Companion is quite good and kind of fun to read. Hyperfine is quite good and kind of fun to do those problems. Certainly for construction details, if you get the Architectural Graphic Standards that I was talking about last week, that's a wonderful book as a reference, but man, that's going to be hard to learn from, and it's huge. So my advice would be, take the exam. If you fail, but it looks like you barely failed, then just keep taking it. If you pass, then that's great. But I will say, and then probably after that, maybe the Fundamentals of Building Construction book, which is a fantastic book and does not get enough credit in the community. It is just such a well-written book and totally still relevant. So, and that's where a lot of the questions on the exam come from, that particular book. Now, if you're interested in learning more about enclosures, there's a book that will help you a lot with that, called High Performance Enclosures by John Straub, S-T-R-A-U-B-E. Here. S-T-R-A-U-B-E. And I think it's called High Performance Building Enclosures. And then its subtitle is, enclosures for cold climate or something like that. But it's not. It covers warm climates just as much as cold. or almost as much. He's Canadian, so I think he just wanted to put a caveat in there. But not because he wanted to be polite the way that Canadians are known to be, but because Canadians deal with cold weather. But yeah, I would say those are good things to do and to learn about. And it's funny with construction, I think it's always more fun to read about planning, but it's always more fun to learn about construction. So, the more you learn about construction, the more empowered you feel. I think learning more about planning is more fun, but learning more about construction makes you feel bigger. And so I would say, kind of attack the construction and detailing questions with zest. But I will also say that Amber Book covers, in most cases, more than enough to pass. So if you understand the stuff in Amber Book, you should be okay.
Okay, thank you.
And no one believes me until it happens, and then they believe me. But
I have another question, Michael, like along the same lines of passing exam. I recently failed the PA exam.
okay.
Would you recommend scheduling that immediately,
Yes.
like, and in the 60-day period, but study for that or continue studying? My goal was to study for PPD, probably, and take that before giving PA again.
Sure. I mean, so PA and PPD both include content on soils. PA and PPD both include content on foundations. PA and PPD both include content on zoning. PA and PPD both include content on programming. There's not that much that is in one that is not in the other. So, honestly, I don't, I'm going back to a broken record, and I know you guys are sick of me hearing me say it. And I know you guys don't believe me, but I think you should schedule the rest of your exams for 2 months from now, PA and everything else, and study for everything that you haven't passed yet. And then maybe instead of passing one, let's say you have 4 exams left and you pass 2 of the 4. Well, then that means in 60 days, you've passed 2 exams instead of 1. So instead of maybe passing 1. so I don't agree with the premise that it's one or the other. I think it's a false choice. I think you schedule both and everything else you have. That said, if you failed miserably, like you weren't even close, then, and if you look at previous 40 minutes of competence, I go over, and some of them at the end, I go over what a good fail report what a close fail report looks like versus a not close fail report. But if you are fairly close, you just reschedule and take it. Don't study anymore. You'll probably pass it next time. If you are, that's the reason that the SAT prep courses and the GRE prep courses guarantee a higher score, because the dirty secret is, in testing world, if you take the same test a second time, you have a higher likelihood of passing. You've already seen the content, you're more familiar with the process, and your mind is a bit clearer. There's fewer new things you're seeing and so forth. So just by virtue of taking it again without any studying, depending on how much you forget between now and then, you're likely to do better. So, so my advice to you would be to schedule it for 60 days, study for PPD also in those 60 days, schedule PPD for those 60 days, and take both, and take PDD while you're at it, and on and on. CE, anything else you have.
Oh, okay, yes. So yeah, those are the 4 that are left. So thank you.
Trust me, guys. I am not. I know you're scared of this. I read the stuff in the forums, and I read the stuff on Facebook, and I know you guys don't believe me, but so many people tell me I'm right when they're done, and so many people wish they had done this process differently after they're done, and when they do it kind of bit by bit. You're just torturing yourself, again, unless you enjoy studying, which many of us do. But if you're not one of the people like me who loves to study, then do yourself a favor, give yourself a holiday present or a New Year's resolution or whatever, and man, knock this stuff out of the park. Just be done with it already.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
If I haven't taken any of my exams yet and I'm signing up for all of them at once,
Yep.
do you recommend they be a few days apart, or are you still in the vein of as fast as you can go?
As close as you can handle it. Now, some people can't do it every day because of work.
Yep.
Some people can't do it every day because of personal commitments. Maybe they have custody of their kids 1 week out of 2, and whatever, or every the second half of every week, whatever. But as much as you feel like you could take, get them as close as you feel like you could possibly take.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Michael.
Yes.
So first, let me thank you, because I just passed my PPD and PDD last week, and the Amber book was the main reference I used. I really thank you for that.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot. And then I'm taking PA next week. And honestly, because you have advice for everything, I have a stupid question.
Yep.
So I am super dependent on using papers. Even when I'm talking, I kind of write. So I'm super afraid of this digital whiteboard. And because I cannot, like the thing that we went through now as for the course today, it was so hard for me not to write it on the paper and just do it using the calculator or even Paint. So do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, don't get mad at me, everyone. Community, please don't get mad at me. It's not going to be life-changing. It's going to be annoying. It's going to be annoying in the same way that having a rock in your shoe is annoying. And most importantly, the cut score, the new kind of passing score, the curve is going to have it built in that everyone else who you're competing against is in the same boat and has the same annoying digital whiteboard. So I think that for most people, the fact that there are 15 fewer questions is going to be way more of a benefit than the rock in your shoe of the digital whiteboard. Practice with it a little bit, know that you're going to be okay. Let's say that it makes you get one more question wrong than you would have gotten otherwise. Okay. But it's going to make other people get one more question wrong than they would have gotten it otherwise. And the cut score, the passing score, is based on what they did too. So it's a rising tide rises all boats, lifts all boats. So I would not perseverate over the whiteboard. I'm not saying don't practice with it, but I would not perseverate over it. It's going to take a little getting used to, and it may cause you to take a little more time, but you have more time per question now. I just, I don't know what to say, but just get over everyone needs to get over the whiteboard. It's here, it's done. And it's for everyone equally. So move on to the other issues that are at hand, specifically content. I would focus on content.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thanks.
All right.
Michael, what about second guessing yourself at the end when you get to go check and you say, oh, should I change it or should I not? Is there any data that supports that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you asked that. Because we all, I'm second guessing, mentioning that the whiteboard's no big deal. Because I know that people, are really, really serious about that. And to be honest, I've been writing about that the last few days. I've been wanting to write about that for months, but I waited till someone else said it online, and then I jumped on because I'm a coward. So here's the deal with second guessing. I actually do have strong feelings, and I'm very pro second guessing, especially if you have enough time. If you're not going to have enough time, that's a different situation. If you're running out of time, don't second guess anything. But if you have time to go back, second guess. And here's why I say that. People always say, oh, you shouldn't second guess. And the reason I think people say that is when I'm in class and I'm going over an exam, the students are zoning out. When I'm going over a question they got right, they zone out. But they don't remember that that they originally picked a different answer and changed it to the right answer. They don't even think about that. But then I get to a question that they got wrong. And I tell them that the answer was B and they had put in C, but they originally had B. So they tell themselves, I should have listened to my original voice. I should have listened to what I had originally and left it at B. You should always leave what you have originally. So I think that advice is based on a skewing of the sample that people have in their own experience. I think they don't pay attention to when they second guess it and get it right, but they totally obsess when they second guessed it and got it wrong. Now, that's if you're a second guess, you're pretty sure you were wrong the first time, but you have to ask yourself, is this a second guess just because I'm not sure if it's B or C and it's a coin flip? Well, then don't change it, go with your original. But if you kind of look at it again, you're like, on second thought, because the general kind of format is, if there's two answers you think are right, I wrote about this week too. If there are two answers you think are right, it's most likely can be resolved in the question. So in other words, the question will say, and it'll say, an architect designing blank program in blank topography or blank climate has blank priorities. And then the question is, which is his best choice? Well, usually if it's usually something about the climate, topography, the priorities that it be less expensive, or the priority that the surface be durable, or whatever the priority is, it's in the question. And so if upon looking at the question, if you're not sure between two things, I would look again at the question, because most likely if there are two that seem right, it's because there are two that are right, but the priorities that are embedded in the question, that it be less expensive or more durable or low energy or less disruptive to the site or less likely to flood, or whatever the kind of priorities are for the developer or the architect. Usually they put the priorities on the owner, and then they put they put the site and everything on just kind of on the from God. And they usually don't give the architect too much control over that. So they'll say the owner prefers there to be minimal disruption to the site because he owns the building next door, and he doesn't want you to be he doesn't want to be disturbed. So you're like, okay, I don't want to be ramming in piles into the ground, because so if the choice was piles or a spread footing on aggregate piers, then you're like, oh, well, one of these involves banging. So that's why they told me that. So those priorities, most of the time, they're actually there to help eliminate one of the bad answers. So to answer your question, if it's a total coin flip, leave your original answer. But most of the time, it's not a coin flip. You want to change it because you realized it was wrong the first time. And look at the question again. If you think you probably were wrong the first time, go ahead and change it. Do not worry about it, and by no means should you be losing sleep over it. Because again, it's like any other decision in your life. If you're deciding whether to save money or spend money, if you're deciding, probably most of you had a really tough time deciding what college to go to. And probably most of you think you made the right decision. But if you were to kind of think about it, if you went to the other college that you were debating between, the other one, you probably would have thought you made the right decision also. So get to that point like you feel about your alma mater, that you made the right decision, and just decide that you made the right decision, and be thankful that you'll never know you'll never know that you made the wrong decision. And if you fail, it doesn't mean it was on that particular problem. It was on all the problems. It's like blaming the goal on the, if you're watching a soccer game and someone scores a goal, they always blame it on the goalie, but the opponent got through 10 other players to get to the goalie. And so just remember, it wasn't that one question that put you over the edge, and it wasn't that one question that caused you to fail. It doesn't work like that. It was all the questions.
Thank you.
So, I mean, if you could kind of summarize my advice for all of these, it's, man, you guys go easy on yourselves. Like, you guys are just way too tough on yourselves. You have my permission, my encouragement to study hard, be rigorous, learn this stuff really well. And then when you feel like you're ready to take the exam and do not feel bad about the outcome. You need to do the best you can possibly do in your current situation, controlling what you can control. And so things like whiteboards or bad breaks or weird questions, don't worry about those. You cannot control those. You can only control how hard you study, and control how you react to the setbacks that likely will come in this process. Good night. Get licensed.